Thank you so much for joining us. This presentation is focused on Parent Plus loan borrowers. We usually do presentations that apply to everyone, but we have found that there are some unique situations and challenges when it comes to managing Parent Plus loans. So we decided to do this presentation, keeping in mind those challenges and hopefully offering a little bit more guidance. We are going to be covering a lot of material today. Here's an agenda. We'll tell you about us at CAP. With us is one of our partner agencies, the City Bar Justice Center. We're going to give you a big Parent Plus loan overview, and then we're going to dive deep into the nitty-gritty. And part of the nitty-gritty is really stepping back and figuring out what is your plan, your strategy, the path that you're going to take when it comes to dealing with your student loans. We're going to discuss some options that may help you determine that path, and we're going to talk about some federal forgiveness, cancellation, and discharge programs that may be applicable to some of you, not all of you. And then we're going to discuss repayment options, a little bit of the ins and outs, especially as it relates to the one and only income-driven repayment plan known as the income contingent repayment. We're also going to talk about keeping your loans in good standing. I know oftentimes parent borrowers are going to retire soon, or they are in retirement and the loan balances may be high. So at that point, we can develop some strategies of what are we going to do with this debt to make sure that your credit is not damaged and all that good stuff. Then we're going to review the timeline of what we expect to happen in the upcoming months with payments resuming and the interest rate resuming. We're going to briefly talk about private student loans, in part because we see a lot of students who sometimes get private loans being co-signed by a parent, a family member usually. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ramona to talk about bankruptcy. I think it's an important conversation. I don't foresee, and hopefully none of you have to go that route, but I think it is important for you to understand the ins and outs. In order to have a better idea, what are your options moving forward, especially if you have loan balances. And then at the end, we're just going to give you some information on what to do if things go wrong as you enter repayment or you explore your options. And at the very end, there's going to be some resources and some links that you can use. Again, this presentation is being recorded, and we will be able to share the recording and the PowerPoint presentation. So let me get started briefly about EdCap. We were created in 2019 by an agency called the Community Service Society of New York. It's a nonprofit that has been around for over 175 years. We had one objective, and that objective was to help directly student loan borrowers manage and, whenever possible, eliminate their student loan debt. We have been officially in operation for 4 years, and in that time, we have obtain a lot of expertise, and I can proudly say that we're probably some of the few advocates that really know the ins and outs when it comes to managing student loans and making sure that we explore every option possible available to borrowers to hopefully help them eliminate it. We would like to believe, and we do firmly believe, we are a one-stop shop, meaning if you have a higher ed issue, we will be able to help you, whether you're dealing with federal loans or private loans. Last year, we were fortunate enough to bring other nonprofit organizations who are doing amazing work in their respective communities to be part of the EdCap network, and one of them is here with us, the City Bar Justice Center. I'm going to turn it over to Ramona to talk a little bit about their work and concentration when it comes to this topic.
Thank you, Carolina, and good evening, everyone. My name is Ramona Morel. I work with the City Bar Justice Center. I'm a bankruptcy attorney, and I run the Justice Center's Consumer Bankruptcy Project. The Justice Center furthers access to justice by addressing the unmet civil legal needs of New Yorkers, of New York City residents. We have about a dozen projects that provide free legal assistance, advice, representation, and advocacy, ranging from elder law, cancer advocacy, veterans assistance, to bankruptcy and student loan debt. Our consumer bankruptcy project specifically assists New York City residents who are burdened with consumer debt to file for bankruptcy relief and obtain a fresh start. And as part of that fresh start, that may include also discharging student loans. In addition to doing bankruptcy work, we also assist student loan borrowers, providing advice and consultation, as well as managing their student loan debt outside of bankruptcy. So thank you, Carolina.
Thank you. And I think bankruptcy and student loans, it's a very relevant topic at this time. Ramona will talk a little bit about the efforts from the Department of Justice and Department of Education in terms of allowing greater flexibility, not a lot, to allow people, again, as Ramona said, to have a fresh start. Bankruptcy is usually the last resort, and we agree on that because it has consequences. But there are some people that really there's no other option. And so hopefully more and more people are able to use that as a tool, again, to address their debt and get a fresh start. So let's move along with Parent Plus loans and give you an overview. As all of you here know, Parent Plus loans are taken out. These are federal loans taken out to pay for your children's college. The cost of college has been rising dramatically in the past few decades, where it's almost inevitable that parents are going to have to take out some loans, especially if they have not had the opportunity or the resources to be able to save for this event. I've seen parents who have multiple kids that they have to put through college, and despite saving as much as they could, fall short and end up having to take federal and or private loans. Usually Parent Plus loans come into play in part because undergraduate students can only borrow up to a set amount, and that amount right now is $31,000 in the aggregate. There's a link there where you can see the caps that undergraduate students can borrow. So Parent Plus loans are allowed for undergrad only. That means a parent cannot take out loans, Parent Plus loans, to pay for someone's graduate education. And part of that is because if you're in graduate school, the caps are a lot higher. And again, Parent Plus loans are going to be covering an undergrad education. Now, part of the challenge or problem that we're seeing is the cost of higher ed is so high. And basically, parents can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus any aid that they receive or the student receive. And that amount can be really high. And oftentimes what we see is parents borrow for the first year, second year, third, and fourth. And really, what they're borrowing is sometimes beyond what they will be able to repay on a monthly basis. And then obviously, there's a financial reality that they have to face once loans enter repayment. Another challenge that we see just by the nature of the system is parents do not technically have to start repaying their loans immediately, so they can defer them and again, not realize that they're borrowing in excess of what they may be able to repay down the line. So I'm just highlighting some of the challenges that we're seeing that parents are facing. I want to say no fault of their own. How do you make a parent decide whether they're going to support their children's education or not, when I am positive they told their children throughout the years, just focus on school. This is the gateway towards economic mobility. And now you face the consequences of okay, well, cost of college is unaffordable. What are we going to do? So there's multiple barriers that lead to increased borrowing and prolonged repayment periods for Parent Plus loans. I always joke, but it's kind of not a joke, that Parent Plus loans and federal loans in general are dischargeable upon death. And I say that I joke about it because it's not what we want, but there are parents that I've seen that they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and it could take them 30 years to pay back on whatever repayment plan they're in, knowing very well that, statistically speaking, they will die before they repay this debt. And one of the concerns is, will this pass on to my estate? And the answer is no. Federal loans are dischargeable upon death and will not pass down. Your spouse, unless it's under their name, they're not going to be responsible for that. So here's a big picture overview of the different forms of loans that parents can take out. I already mentioned federal loans with those caps. The benefits, it's usually that you're going to have a quote unquote lower interest rate in comparison to private loans, but the reality is that Parent Plus loans carry the highest interest rate when it comes to federal loans, right? We're looking at 7% plus. And so that's concerning for obvious reasons. You want to take a look at like other sources, private college loans, which again, the downside of those is a higher interest rate. There's very little repayment options. If the loan is being issued to the student borrower, there's going to be a cosigner, because in most cases, someone who is going to undergrad, for example, is not going to have the credit or employment history in order to qualify for those loans. So you can review that. Again, this is just big picture overview of where money comes for both the student and the parent, and the pros and cons. Obviously, if you've joined this presentation, you have parent debt, whether that's only Parent Plus loan or a combination of Parent Plus and private debt is going to be different. And we hope to cover again a little bit of information when it comes to private loans. So there are basically no rules of thumb for parenting and like how much debt did you acquire or will you acquire, but here's some food for thought. And I know this is like after the fact, but I think it's useful to reflect on it. One of the strategies to addressing this, and again, I recognize this is after the fact, is really instilling in parents an analysis of what can they truly afford. And that planning has to happen not in the senior year, it has to happen earlier, because the last thing is you don't want your child or young adult to be committed to one school and then come to find out that the financial aid packet is not enough and you're going to have to borrow a lot more than what you expected, right? So I think one rule of thumb is really step back and figure out, if you haven't borrowed, what can you realistically afford to repay? And then as college acceptance letters and financial aid award letters are coming back, really assess what can you afford to make a more informed decision. Another tip to consider, and I recognize after the fact, is like your child's commitment to their education. I've had conversations with parents that flat out tell me, my son, my daughter told me that they want to have a good time in college. Well, that's a big red flag, right? Like if they want to have a good time and have the college experience, whatever that may mean, great. How much of your resources are you going to risk in order for them to have that? And if you have the resources, by all means, go ahead and do it. Versus someone who says, I really want to go to this school. It's a little bit more expensive because they offer this specific degree. And there's a commitment since early on. That's what they've always said that they wanted to do. And at that point, you might be willing to sacrifice a little more and send them to that particular school. These are all hard conversations that you will need to have. And again, it may come in late at this point for some of you. What is borrowing going to mean to your retirement? I cannot emphasize how many people tell me, like, I am looking to retire within the next 5 years. And yet they're dealing with 150,000 in Parent Plus loans. And there are severe consequences of what that means, because once you go into retirement, you have a set income and you're going to need every resource to hopefully maintain your same lifestyle. And to have this debt burden, it's going to be tough. And then, other basic things. Does your child really understand the impact it will have financially in general, not only on your finances, but as a household, especially if you have multiple kids going to college? There are some things that they can do to mitigate the cost, earning credits when they're in high school for college, potentially going to a less expensive school. A big saver that I don't think college students want to hear about is living expenses. Can they go to a college nearby where they can commute in order to save? A big percentage of parent debt or student debt in general comes from living expenses. So that's an area. Again, I am not about to tell you anything that you need to do. Those are your private conversations, family matters, but these are some rules of thumbs or general food for thought, I would say, if you're still working towards getting kids through college, that may be helpful. You will do what is best for you and your family. If you already have Parent Plus loans, which I again acknowledge that most of you who are here do, you want to create a realistic objective and determine the best path forward. And I always say, come back and revisit that path. It doesn't mean that you decide like, okay, this is what I'm going to do in terms of how I'm going to tackle this debt. Your life circumstances can change. Come back and revisit it and see if that's still the right path for you. We're going to talk about 3 main paths. The first one is sometimes not realistic for a lot of our borrowers, and I'm not just talking about Parent Plus loans. They're not realistic even for student borrowers. And that is pay the debt in full as quickly as possible. I think whenever we think about student loans, we think about like, oh, I have to repay those loans. And technically, yes, you do. But in some circumstances, you may not have to repay them all because there are some forgiveness programs that you may be pursuing. But the first path, again, is like you're going to pay this debt and you want to pay it as quickly as possible. If that's your path that you take, and you're going to get more information on all of this, then treat it like credit card, treat it like any other debt. The sooner you pay it off, the more you're going to save in interest. I always recommend for you to play around with some student loan calculators or just general calculators. Put in the amount that you owe, the average interest rate, and play around with the repayment period. Do you want to be done in 10 years, 15 years? And then take a look at that monthly amount and what's feasible. There's no prepayment penalty for any federal loans or student loans in general. I have yet to see it for a private student loan. You can pay lump sums, you can pay extra monthly. The caution with paying extra monthly is you might need to talk to your servicer so you don't get into this issue known as pay ahead. We can provide you more information if you have questions about that. The second path is pay the minimum required and pursue a forgiveness program. And that's going to be most relevant to people who have high balances comparison to their income. And a forgiveness program may be the only way out to get rid of this debt within a reasonable time frame. What is a reasonable time frame? Well, it depends, right? If you're pursuing a program like public service loan forgiveness, that could get you out in 10 years. If you're not pursuing that or other shorter term programs, it could be 20 to 25 years. When it comes to one program that we'll be talking about for you as a parent borrower, it's going to be 25 years. So if you're pursuing that path, the key there is to enroll in the required repayment plan and then track your progress and know that that's your objective, to pay the minimum required to meet the program's requirements and then get as much of it forgiven. The third path, which I know I've already alluded to, and I know it can be uncomfortable for some, is like pay the minimum required under any of the plans. Like what's the cheapest plan you can get until you're done, you die, right? Like again, understanding that federal loans are dischargeable upon death, that could very well be a strategy. Now, some of you may not be there because you're still working and retirement is not near. Just keep that in mind as you move through your different stages. Let me make sure I didn't. Yeah. Tips to determine the path that you might want to take. Do the math, simple math. Figure out what can you realistically afford on a monthly basis. Remember, you still have to have a food and shelter. And then figure out how long it's going to take you to repay it. I already mentioned that you might want to use a calculator. Assess feasibility. What are you going to be able to pay without, again, sacrificing basics? And if you're sacrificing something, how long is the sacrifice going to be? And is that realistic, right? If you are still working, I highly encourage you to do hypotheticals of what it looks like right now, because repayments are resuming, but also what it may look like down the line when you retire. Again, you want to have a sense of what your situation looks like from a repayment perspective. Can you realistically repay it back? And if not, then you want to consider the different strategies that we just talked about, which we're going to dive into each one. And I'm going to try to speed up because I am sure I'm taking too long here. Paying off debt quickly. You want to make sure that before you pursue this, you don't qualify for any of the forgiveness programs that may get you to eliminate this debt a lot faster in some cases, or it may save you a lot of money. So we'll talk about those forgiveness programs. One thing to know is when you pursue a forgiveness program, especially for the federal forgiveness programs that we're going to talk about, you have to enroll in a repayment plan in order to maintain your eligibility for that. You can switch your repayment plans at any point, so that should not be a problem. When your goal is to pay off the debt quickly, it doesn't matter necessarily which repayment plan you're in, you can always pay more. So a lot of people think that they have to enroll in a high monthly payment plan. That is not necessarily correct. You can enroll in a repayment plan that you're comfortable, but behind the scenes, you know that you're going to pay off this debt quickly. So that's where the lump sum payments come in. That's where the extra payments come in. Some servicer websites will give you the ability to add extra payments on their website. If you have any issues, you want to talk to the servicer to make sure that they're applying the payments correctly. When you pay your payments or you pay extra, a lot of people want it to go towards their principal. Know that extra payments are going to apply to some of the interest if you have outstanding interest. That's just the way it works. So we sometimes get client upset that it's like, oh, I wanted the principal to go down. Well, when you make extra payments or when you make payments in general, some of that is going to be applied to the outstanding interest. Again, I'm going to say the faster you pay this, the more you're going to save in interest. Now, there's a caution there about taking out another loan to pay off federal loans. The interest rate for federal loans, for Parent Plus loans, can be high. And not right now, maybe, but a year ago or so, you could probably get a much lower interest rate if you took out a private loan to pay off the federal loan. The problem with doing that is the moment you pay off your federal loans with a private loan, you no longer have the repayment options. You no longer have access to the forgiveness programs or any other future relief the federal government may implement. And that's a concern because once they become private loans, the lender is going to want their money and you're going to have a lot less options. The only time I usually recommend someone to look into refinancing federal loans into private is when they have a small loan balance or a manageable loan balance, and they could realistically save a lot of money by getting a lower interest rate. That is not the time right now. I would caution you, if you are even exploring, considering that option, reach out to us. We want to have a full conversation of what that may mean. You don't want to risk it. There's a lot of benefits to staying within the federal system. Okay, so that's path one, pay it off as soon as possible. Path number two is like find a forgiveness, cancellation, or discharge program and then track your progress. I'm just going to mention a few things about this. The Biden and Harris cancellation says that you could get up to $20,000 if you had a Pell Grant, otherwise $10,000 and meet the income requirements highlighted there. The Supreme Court is still pending a decision. We might hear about it tomorrow. We might hear about it next week. No later potentially than the first week in July. So it's coming up. For a lot of parents, they may meet the income threshold. They will likely only get $10,000. I feel the most of the parents we have seen might not have had their own loans to even have a Pell Grant, but $10,000 still helps. So be aware, you're going to hear in the news. If the Supreme Court allows this to move forward and you didn't apply when the application period was open last year, I'm sure it's going to be all over the news. You will have an opportunity to apply. Reach out to us if you have questions when that announcement is made. You can register for updates at FSA at the Department of Education website. A big program that has taken a big overhaul and we're seeing very positive outcomes is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. If you work in the public sector, nonprofit, government, I highly, highly recommend you take a look into this program. Basically, this program says that if you work full-time for a qualifying nonprofit government employer, after making 10 years worth of payments, you will have your remaining loan balance forgiven. The reason why I'm encouraging people who work in the public sector to explore this program is because technically, if you had Parent Plus loans prior to COVID, and you could potentially already have 3 years towards this program, right? Because suspended payments under COVID count towards PSLF. So in the past, we always do a lot of math with clients to see does PSLF make sense? I have a feeling that it might now make sense for a lot of more borrowers who can get credit for the 3+ years that we were in the COVID. Now, you can only accumulate credit towards PSLF after the loans have entered repayment. So I have a lot of parents who come to me and say, I've been working for the city for 20 years. I should be done. But, their loans enter repayment in 2020. Well, that's not going to happen. You do not get retroactive credit if the loans were not in repayment and were not even in existence. So that's something to be aware of. On the slides, you'll be able to see that if you're pursuing PSLF, all this information is at studentaid.gov. You will have to file an employment certification form. Mohila is the servicer that manages that program. So if your loans are not with Mohila, once you file the public service loan forgiveness form, your loans are going to be transferred to them for you to be evaluated and get a payment tracker, or let you know, in other words, where you stand with public service loan forgiveness. Some of the common challenges when it comes to Parent Plus loans and PSLF is some people may be at their prime earning, meaning they have Parent Plus loans and they're making quote unquote reasonable money. They're towards the end of their career, so their income may be high. In order to qualify for the public service loan forgiveness program, or to finish the program at this point, you have to enroll in the income contingent repayment plan. And that is one of the more expensive plans within the umbrella of income driven plans. I will talk about those shortly. So sometimes it doesn't make sense because they're going to be done paying the loans under that plan before they get forgiveness. Or sometimes it may not make sense because they're about to retire and they will never be able to fulfill the employment requirement. So be aware of those things. Let me make sure. I should mention that anytime that your loans were in an in-school deferment, that time period won't count. So I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that one of the challenges is that parents don't have to repay their loans immediately. So it's possible that you took out loans for the first year, second year, third, and fourth, and you didn't start paying on any of them. So that means you're not getting any credit towards public service loan forgiveness because, again, the loans were not in repayment. I should say that under another program, the IDR account adjustment, you do have the opportunity right now to consolidate the loans to make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness, which I'll talk more about the hurdles there. And you will get the highest payment count. So again, they will give you the highest payment count of any underlying loan as long as they were in repayment and you meet the employment requirement. So you definitely want to explore the IDR account adjustment and see how it may benefit you if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness. Well, what about if you don't work in the public sector? So there's this other program that it's also getting a semi-overhaul at this point. And that one is called the income-driven repayment forgiveness. And that program basically says that if you pay your loans for 20 years, it's 25 years if you have Parent Plus loans, then the remaining balance gets forgiven after those 25 years. And 25 years is a mighty long time, but I've seen borrowers who are at the 25-year mark still paying their Parent Plus loans. So I know it's a long time, but this is kind of the default program. This is like the worst case scenario. You can see that if you have Parent Plus loans after 25 years of being in repayment, they will be forgiven. The reason why this may be of interest is because the government, in acknowledgement of how bad this program has operated, is going to do a one-time adjustment. What that means is that they're going to give you credit towards the 25 years as long as your loans were in repayment, and that's it. Like, even if you didn't have an income-driven repayment plan. The key towards income-driven repayment forgiveness is that you must stay enrolled in the income contingent repayment plan, which means for Parent Plus loans, if you have direct Parent Plus loans, or if you have what are known as FELP Parent Plus loans, you have to consolidate them before the end of the year to get that retroactive credit. And then moving forward, if you're not done with the 25 years, in order for you to get income-driven repayment forgiveness, you have to remain enrolled in the income contingent repayment plan. If I've managed to lose you and confuse you, worry not. you can reach out to us and we can go over and look at your loans and explore the specifics of this program and how it may apply to you. Not everyone's going to benefit from the IDRF forgiveness for different reasons. So just be aware, it's definitely worth looking into, but don't stress if you're confused, you can always come back. And this is kind of this slide here. It's kind of a summary of what the government is doing to, again, give retroactive credit to borrowers and give them credit for the program, the income-driven repayment adjustment. The key takeaway is if you have Parent Plus loans, direct Parent Plus loans, or FFELP Parent Plus loans, and you've never consolidated them, meaning you need to consolidate them into a direct consolidated Parent Plus loan. If you ask me why you need to do that in order to benefit from these programs, I know it's crazy. Like, I have no good explanation for you other than that's the rule. And in order for you to get access to the income contingent repayment plan and finish any of these programs, if you're not there, you must consolidate and end up with direct consolidated Parent Plus loans. Like I said, you're going to get this PowerPoint, you're going to get links to all this information that you can explore further. I'm going to mention another program that I like to discuss with Parent Plus loan borrowers, and that's total and permanent disability discharge. This program basically says that if you cannot work and support yourself financially and you have a disability, that if you qualify, you will get your loans discharged through this program. And it's a great program that I don't think enough people know about. Now, if you're healthy, still working, no disability, this doesn't apply to you. But it could apply to you down the line if you develop health conditions, if you are on a set income. There are very specific requirements. Nelnet is the student loan servicer managing this program. They have FAQs, the application, a lot of information on their website. You're going to get this. Again, I am giving you this information just for the future in case something happens. I obviously wish you a healthy life, a long life, but this is something that I feel like every borrower who may be entering retirement or have Parent Plus loans should just generally be aware that there is this thing that if you develop health conditions, become disabled, you may be able to access this program. And the beauty of this program is, at least right now, they can process an application within a couple months and your doctor will certify the disability and they will take it from there. So it's a great program if you meet the eligibility requirements. Borrower Defense to Repayment is another program that I personally like to talk about. It might not apply to any of you here today, but that basically says that if you went to a school that defrauded you as a student, in this case, it could have been your son, daughter, your child went to a school that defrauded them. You could submit a borrower defense to repayment claim with the federal government, with the Department of Education. And basically you're saying, I should not have to pay this debt because I was lured into the program. So what am I talking about? I've had Parent Plus loan borrowers who took out $150,000 for an associate's degree for their child. The school was shady, to say the least. It lured parents. It told them you have to enroll today on a Saturday. There's only like 5 seats left. You're not going to jeopardize your child's education. I mean, flat out fraud. And then they said there's a lot of scholarships. The school is so competitive, and the school is like arguably not even accredited. So, some of those programs, let's just say that if they were not accredited, they will lose their accreditation. So keep that in mind. Again, it might not apply to you, but if you feel your child went to a school that acted improper, it does not mean like school dissatisfaction, like you didn't like the professors, you thought the curriculum was not rigorous. Well, that's not going to cut it. It has to be fraud, deception involved. The application is dense, but it's totally manageable, and we can help you apply it if you feel that that is something you want to pursue. In summary, if you're pursuing a forgiveness program, be fully aware of the eligibility requirements. Keep in mind your retirement date because you want to know and make sure that you're going to be able to complete the program. Track your progress. FSA is working hard to give people more access to the ability to track it. If you're pursuing PSLF, Mohila has a tracker. For the IDR forgiveness program. FSA is supposed to come out with a tracker. You will be able to see that when it launches, probably within a year or more, on the FSA account. Every borrower has an FSA account. You should definitely log in and make sure your information is updated. Regardless of the path you take, you want to enroll in the right repayment plan. As I mentioned, public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment forgiveness. If you have parent plus loans, there's only one income-driven repayment plan, and that's the umbrella that you're eligible for after you consolidate your parent plus loans, and that is the income contingent repayment plan. Let me repeat this. There's only one income-driven repayment plan called the income contingent repayment that parent plus loans are eligible after they consolidate and end up with direct consolidated parent plus loans. Go back and read those 2 lines, because I think that is a critical piece that a lot of parent plus loan borrowers don't understand. Know that if you are married and file your taxes jointly, it's going to count your spouse's income. If you file your taxes separately, it's not going to count your spouse's income. You want to speak to an accountant to figure out the pros and cons of filing jointly versus separately for tax purposes and for payment purposes. If your spouse is making $200,000, you're making $38,000, I can tell you that chances are you're better off filing separately if you're the one who has the loans, right? It also matters who has the loans. Like if you're the one with a lower income and have the loans, filing separately may be a good thing. Again, speak to an accountant to know the numbers. A word of caution: if you have your own loans that you took out for your own education and parent plus loans, get advice before you consolidate, because the whole consolidated loan is going to be subject to the ICR plan, and that may not be beneficial. Again, if you have your own loans and parent plus loans, reach out for help, because we want to discuss the pros and cons of you consolidating everything together versus the parent plus on the side. Keep loans in good standing until the end of time. I've already mentioned this, self-explanatory. You want to know what are your repayment plan options, choose the lowest repayment plan, and then just keep them in good standing. The reason why you want to keep your loans in good standing is if you don't and you fall delinquent or default on the loans, the federal government can administratively garnish your wages, intercept your Social Security, retirement. If you're getting disability, they can intercept that. So there's real consequences. And so you do want to keep your loans in good standing. Again, pick the most affordable repayment plan, and then that should be your strategy until the very end of time. Fresh start: if your loans are in default, and that includes parent plus loans, there's a new way for you to get them back in good standing. You're going to get this presentation, so you'll be able to see that information. It takes like a 10-minute call in order to request this benefit of fresh start, and it clears your credit reporting data and a lot of good stuff. Please get out of default right now if your loans are in default. If you need help doing that, we can help you with that. A quick timeline of what's happening. As I mentioned, we're waiting for the Supreme Court to issue a decision on the Biden and Harris cancellation. That should happen in the next 2 to 3 weeks. It could happen tomorrow. Now, federal loan payments are not going to resume until October, but in September, the interest is going to start. If any of you want to take advantage of the IDR account adjustment, which will give you more credit, arguably, towards public service loan forgiveness and the income-driven repayment forgiveness plan, you must make sure you have consolidated your loans before December 31st. Next year, you're going to get a final payment count, both whether you're pursuing PSLF or income-driven repayment forgiveness, to know where you stand in relation to those programs. Fresh Start is going to go on for defaulted loan borrowers a year after payments resume. So that's going to be late 2024. Managing private student loans. You don't have the same repayment benefits as federal student loans. You don't have access to the forgiveness programs as you do with federal student loans. There is this thing called cosigner release, meaning the lender is willing to let you go as a cosigner, because I'm assuming you are a cosigner. In order for you to do that, you cannot show any signs of distress, meaning if you ask the private lender for a forbearance because you cannot pay, they're not going to want to let you go, right? So the only times I've seen anyone get released is when the student borrower has been working for their job for 1 to 2 years, has really good income, and can assume the loan by themselves. Otherwise, the lender has no regard to letting you go. Why would they let you go if they can secure their debt through you? So to look into cosigner release, each lender has their own rules. There's no standard rules, unfortunately. We cannot force a private lender, despite showing like ability to repay by the student borrower, to let go of you as a cosigner. The only kind of benefit to private loans, it is subject to a statute of limitation, where federal loans are not subject to a statute of limitations. The statute of limitations is the time frame the lender has to sue you to collect on that debt. There is a question whether in New York it's still 6 years or 3 years. If you defaulted on your private loans and it's been 3 years, I would like to speak to you because we would like to test out the statute of limitations. I would not be doing it. I would be referring you to an attorney who can do that successfully. But it's anywhere 3 years to 6 years. There's still a question of which one applies right now. As I mentioned before, we don't recommend refinancing private loans into federal loans. And I am like horrible. I'm going to give my colleague Ramona 15 minutes to cover her section. So hopefully you can bear with us. We might go over a little bit. So Ramona, let's talk about bankruptcy.
Great, thank you. And thank you for all of that very valuable information, Carolina. Looking at all of the different types of options is really important, whether it's trying to pay your student loans as quickly as possible, looking for forgiveness programs, or some kind of affordable repayment program. But when that doesn't work, you may also want to consider filing for bankruptcy. So if Carolina, you can advance to the next slide. So just want to, talk a little bit about, what is bankruptcy, and then how does discharging student loans in bankruptcy actually play out? In reality, bankruptcy should be the last resort. It is a very complicated process, and certainly you do need private counsel, an attorney to represent you if you are seeking to file for bankruptcy and get your student loans discharged. But before you can even start to think about discharging your student loans, you actually need to know if you're eligible to file for bankruptcy. There are different types of requirements and eligibility that you have to meet in order to file for bankruptcy. And there are different types of bankruptcy options that are available. In some cases, you can use a bankruptcy as a tool to discharge some of your debts. In some cases, you may lose property. So it's very important you do speak to a private attorney. You can reach out to us. You can reach out to CSS and EdCap to get a referral to us to get some advice on bankruptcy. But that being said, although it is a very difficult process and a very complicated one, it is not impossible to get your student loans discharged. And when I say student loans, I'm not only talking about federal student loans. You can use the bankruptcy option to also discharge private student loans. So generally, under the bankruptcy law, student loans are not dischargeable. So now you're thinking, well, Ramona, how is that possible? You just said it's possible that you can get your student loans discharged. Generally, they're not dischargeable unless you can meet an undue hardship. And I will actually discuss this in more detail. But typically, you must demonstrate that repaying your student loans would cause you and your dependents an undue hardship. And it is a very high standard to meet. So with student loans, with bankruptcy, basically it is used to get from under certain debts like credit cards, store cards, medical debts. And that's the bulk of a bankruptcy filing. A second proceeding in your bankruptcy case will help you to help a court determine if your student loans are actually dischargeable or not. And in order to do that, which is a separate legal proceeding, and it's actually a separate legal proceeding per student loan type. So if you do have both federal student loans and private student loans, you do have to do a separate proceeding for each in order to seek a dischargeability of both types of student loans. But the separate legal proceeding, what we call an adversary proceeding, that's where you would show that you have an undue hardship. And if Carolina, you can advance to the next slide, I can discuss in detail, what does that mean? So depending where you live, the undue hardship can be a three-part test, which we refer to as the Brunner Test, or a totality of the circumstances test to determine if your student loans are dischargeable or not. In New York, we use the three-part Brunner analysis, which actually looks at your current, your future, and your past financial situations. And you must prove all three parts in order to get your student loans discharged. And the next slide. The first part, which we call the current prong or current test, basically you must show that currently, right now, you are unable to pay back your student loans while maintaining a minimal standard of living. And what that actually means is that you have to show that based on your household income and your reasonable and necessary household expenses, you cannot maintain a minimal standard of living if you are obligated to repay back your student loans, and that it will continue for the future. So the second prong is that you must also show there are additional circumstances. Sometimes these additional circumstances can be perhaps an illness or a disability made for yourself or household member whose income you're dependent on and have lost income due to the illness or disability, or if you have a dependent who has an illness and a disability, that these circumstances exist right now and will continue to exist for a significant portion period of the student loan repayment, and will prevent you from making payments because you're not able to continue to earn more money, or in the future you will no longer be earning any kind of money or income to pay your student loans. And I have to say that this second part of the Brunner test is the most difficult part for most borrowers to meet, because how do you know what the future, what lies in the future? You certainly have a lot of things to prove in this part of the test, and the burden really is on you to prove that, not only to the student loan lender, but also to the bankruptcy judge. The last part of the Brunner test is to show that you have made, in the past, good faith repayment efforts. So that means that you've made some kind of effort to repay your student loans. And it doesn't mean that you have to pay the full amount every month, but even those months where you try to make payments, you made partial payments, deferments, forbearances, requests, any forbearance or requests that you made will also count towards some kind of good faith, as long as you have worked with the lender to try to repay back those student loans in the past. You can meet this standard. Some things to consider and some additional factors that the courts and the lenders actually look at as you're meeting the three-part Brunner test. They will take into consideration whether you've entered into some kind of alternative repayment plan for your student loans, how much effort you've made in the past to repay those student loans. And if you have, if I mentioned that you have some federal and some private student loans, each one will have their own analysis. So you do have to prove that Brunner test, that three-part for the federal and that three-part test for the private student loans. The student loan dischargeability is determined on a case-by-case basis. It's going to be determined on your specific situation and circumstances. So the court will certainly look at your household expenses, where you have made efforts to cut certain types of expenses, your household income. And when I say household, I mean you and those in your home who have income towards the household expenses. The lenders will also, because the burden falls on you, will look at any efforts you have made to increase your salary, increase your income, what kind of jobs you've had in the past. And if you've had any, if having medical issues or health issues is one of the factors that you're going to present that prevents you from earning more income, or makes it very difficult for you to pay your student loans, be prepared to provide medical documents. That being said, at my program, we've been successful in helping individuals who have met that very strict test to get their student loans discharged in bankruptcy. Now, with federal student loans, there are some new guidelines that have been issued by the Department of Education to the Department of Justice, who actually oversees the litigation of student loan debts in bankruptcy. This guidance, it's a new guidance that was issued at the end of last year, helps to streamline the process of discharging the student loans. So the Department of Justice actually uses that Brunner test, that 3-part test. And instead of making it very difficult, a high standard to meet, they have a guidance where you can show based on certain types of IRS standards for expenses, as well as circumstances for the future, and as well as repayment options, meaning that you no longer have to show that you've entered into an alternative repayment plan to pay your student loans, but making some form of payments in the past would suffice. They're just trying to make it much easier for folks to settle with the Department of Justice and get their federal student discharged in bankruptcy. So it does require you completing an attestation form, which you would set out all of that and meet those 3-part tests. Again, student loans, discharging student loans in bankruptcy can be difficult, but not impossible. And I want to just say one more thing about bankruptcy before I handed it back to you, Carolina, is although this may be a difficult process to get student loans discharged in bankruptcy, and even if you don't think you meet the Brunner test, if you do have a lot of high debts that you're struggling with, bankruptcy may also be a tool to get a fresh start. It's a way to discharge and eliminate your obligations to pay back your unsecured creditors, freeing up some of those payments to be able then to afford your student loans. So if that's something that you're struggling with because you have other debts, you may also consider bankruptcy in that sort of way as a tool to help you to be able to pay your student loans moving forward.
Thank you, Ramona. And I think we're adding this piece on bankruptcy because I think, again, as Ramona mentioned, it's not easy to discharge student loans in bankruptcy, but it's not impossible. And there are signals by the Department of Education and the Department of Justice to make it easier, acknowledging that this has been a barrier and no one should be in retirement or at any point drowning in debt when the bankruptcy system is supposed to do that, right? It's supposed to give people a fresh start. Unfortunately, student loans have been given the highest protection ever. And it doesn't make sense when, again, we know that life happens and people are not just going to jump on to say, let me fix my problems by filing bankruptcy. It's an entire process that has to be plan. And so do take advantage of this information if it's helpful, if you ever need a consultation just to figure out what it may look like in your situation. Obviously, Ramona and her team are available and you can reach out to us and we'll refer you to them. We're almost done. Filing and escalating complaints. If you ever have issues, know that the Department of Financial Services in New York State actually oversees student loan servicers since 2019. And they do a pretty good job. So if you're not hearing from your student loan servicer on an issue that you've raised, or there's any complaint that you want to make, you can go ahead and file a complaint online. It will take you 10 to 15 minutes to do it online. You can also reach out to the ombudsman at FSA. We provided a link and a phone number. These are all gateways for you to be able to elevate your issue and get it resolved. Obviously, you can contact EdCap at any point and we can either help you file the complaint and try to resolve your issue if we can. At the very end, you're going to find a lot of the links to the various programs we discussed and talked about. We hope it is useful. Again, you'll get a copy of this presentation. And I know I cover a lot. And if there's any summary words, I'm going to go back to just one slide and end with this. Student loan debt can be very stressful. Managing it, repaying it, thinking about how long you're going to have to deal with this debt is beyond stressful. One, we are here to support you. If we cannot help you eliminate your debt within a reasonable time period, we can at least help you get peace of mind to know that you're following a strategy and that strategy makes sense for you and your household and your family. Think back and do the math of what you can realistically afford now and potentially in the future and figure out what is your best path and then pursue it. You can always come back and revisit. So as overwhelming as it may be, I think the sooner you figure this part out and figure what you can afford, the faster you're going to be in a place to beat the rush that is coming, right? So if you need help enrolling in a repayment plan or reviewing your repayment plan options, reach out to us. We're happy to do a one-on-one and get you set up before payments resume in October. And with that, a big thank you to Ramona and all her work that she is doing with bankruptcy. Again, it can provide relief to some borrowers and give them a fresh start. Nancy, I will turn it over to you to see if there's any questions or anything else you want to elevate as we near the end.
So there were no questions. I did want to make one point about Fresh Start. This is the Fresh Start getting loans out of default program for student loans. If you avail yourself of the Fresh Start program, if your loans are in default and you avail yourself of that program, not only will you get your loans back into good standing and repair your credit, but under normal circumstances, periods in default do not count towards these forgiveness programs that we've been talking about. But as part of the Fresh Start program, you will get credit for periods that you were in default during the payment pause. So any period that you were in default from March 2020 through now, or when you bring your loans out of default, you will actually get credit towards forgiveness if you use Fresh Start to remedy your default. So that's a big plus. So for anybody that is in default, now's the time to do that. And I would certainly urge Parent Plus borrowers to do that before the end of the year, as opposed to waiting until next year.
Thank you, Nancy. And on the screen, you have our contact information. Again, feel free to reach out. If you end up reaching out to us at EdCap, at CSS, and you have bankruptcy, we will be happy to forward your referral over to Ramona to get some expert advice. Again, a big thank you to the City Bar Justice Center Bankruptcy Project for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.